I've just returned from a trip to Normandy, Caen to be precise. I had 4 days or so out there. Now, it was a great trip, but I was working pretty much the whole time, so I didn't get the opportunity to go to any of the beaches or any of the museums and so on. Maybe next time. However, it was quite strange seeing signposts to those places that are familiar to us from military history, Falaise, Ardennes Abbey, and so on and so on. And the trip, along with something that Terry from Bedford Gladiators posted up on my recent Panzer Colours review, did remind me of another book that I have in my collection. So this is a book from a similar era, very similar idea, very similar layout. So today on Dragon's Teeth, we're taking a look at D-Day to Berlin. Hi there, I'm Rob Hoyton. Thanks for joining me today. So yeah, we're looking at D-Day to Berlin, armour camouflage and markings of the United States, British and German armies, June 1944 to May 1945. So this is basically the D-Day campaign all the way up to the surrender in Berlin. The author this time is Terry Wise, well-known wargamer, and as I think I mentioned last time, his introduction to battle gaming was the first wargaming book that I ever bought. This book again is published by Arms and Armour Press, and this came out in 1979, which is about when I would have bought it, maybe 1980. So we've got very much the same format. The majority are black and white photos, but 65 are those colour plates. That's 270 illustrations in all, divided of course into the 3 separate armies. So let's take a look inside. D-Day to Berlin then. Terence Wise needs no introduction, I'm sure. And as I said, this is very much the same format as Panzer Colours and starts with a very nice introduction to the principles of camouflage, particularly of course as they relate to this theatre, because Normandy, we had the bocage, we had hedgerows, a lot of vegetation, so the colour schemes reflect that. And we get a nice example here of counter shading, how the top areas are darkened, how the shape of the vehicle is broken up through the use of various shades and patterns of camouflage. And from there we're straight into the US Army with a picture of a Sherman. This is a prototype for the M4A3 76mm gun, test firing in France, March 1945. So quite late in the scheme of things. And again, as I mentioned with Panzer Colours, one reason I didn't get into Allied armour so much was the fact that everything is pretty much or olive drab. So that's what this is. But again, as with Panzer Colours, note the huge amount of dust and scratches on here. And I also noticed there, let me just zoom in on that so you can see it. It was quite common for crews to name their tanks. This one's called Wifey, isn't that nice? And from there we're into a whole range of US vehicles, armoured cars, half-tracks, tanks of course. And again, although they are all olive drab, we get to see the huge variety, perhaps not only in the shade of that olive drab, but also how it was affected by weathering and other factors. And we get to see across the whole time span of the campaign and lots of different types of unit as well. For example, here we've got tanks and lorries of a Free French unit at Utah Beach, August 1944. Again, these are quite fresh. I guess they're new tanks just coming up to the line, all olive drab. Compare that to this armoured car here, which is a little less fresh, covered in a lot of dust and stains. And one thing I always notice with American crews is the amount of kit they manage to fit onto their vehicles as well. And we start to get some history of the camouflage in the US Army. So for example here, in October 1942, new instructions were issued for the camouflage painting of vehicles. Olive drab remained the overall colour, but was now to be broken up by the use of field drab number 4 in temperate zones, with black paint used on the top surface and bottom edges of vehicles. Other new colours included earth red, though that was not used so much in Europe, it says there. So it sounds like with the Germans there were quite strict guidelines and instructions given, but in the field, of course, almost anything went. Here we see olive drab, but look how light that looks. I guess, again, that's dust and mud, and then that wet mud on the bottom. So that's almost like a three-colour camouflage in itself. We get something of the use of foliage here with the Americans. Of course, they had air superiority, so a lot less need for that than the German forces. But I guess on occasion they'd still want to camouflage their units. And here we see an interesting example of camouflage netting being used. These are vehicles of the First Army, concentrated for the crossing of the River Ruhr in February 1945, and this is obviously to guard against aircraft, enemy aircraft, observing them. We get something of the different seasons here as well, of course, because the campaign started in summer, went through the winter of 44-45 and on into the next summer. And that is even more evident in these pictures. We've got M8 armoured cars in January 1945 in Germany. These are, or the lead one is whitewashed. And here we've got Sherman's. This is St. Vith. So this is the Ardennes, the Bulge, January 1945. White paint plus a sprinkling of snow. But I thought the interesting thing with this was the petrol stains have taken the paint away, where they've obviously been refuelling. And it sort of made me think, I usually manage when I refuel my car to get petrol all over 1 foot or something. You think refueling a tank would be easier, wouldn't you? Well, maybe not. There's a slightly better paint job on a half track, but by and large, aside from this winter camo, everything is pretty much olive drab. And it's interesting, again, maybe it's an aircraft recognition thing or for friendly units. The white star is actually quite a size on most American AFVs. And then we get into the first of our colour plates. So here's that olive drab with the field drab painted over it. So that's a two-tone colour scheme. And from there, we're into the British Army. And the chapter starts with a brief discussion of the British use of camouflage. British used several different camouflage colour schemes during the course of the Second World War. Obviously they were fighting in different theatres, but also because they were using AFVs and other vehicles manufactured in the States, then they came with their own colours. We have our next set of plates here, still the American forces. There's some of those snow schemes, again from whitewash to what looks like whitewash or even chalk, which again mirrors our Panzer colours. One particular scheme that the British did develop was this sort of circular pattern camouflage, which became known as the Mickey Mouse ear pattern. And here's some more examples of our Mickey Mouse schemes. This seems to have been quite prevalent on soft-skin vehicles, trucks and the like. Not so much on tanks, though we do get the Sexton self-propelled gun here. And of course we get some idea of the various types of weather conditions and terrain these units are operating in, from mud through going across rivers. There's even some of the airborne units there, gliders. I'm guessing that's Arnhem. Yep, that's an H2 artillery group at Arnhem. The Jeep is in overall khaki drab, but the trailer has the Mickey Mouse pattern on it. So no camouflage for the Jeep, but the trailer is hidden. And here's another example of the use of foliage, quite extensive, again from self-propelled artillery. So I suppose with artillery you're sort of stationary, you're dug in, so you do want your position to be concealed. I don't know that we see that so much on the tanks themselves, although having said that, on this page we've got a Sherman of the 8th Armoured Brigade at Issum, March 1945. And they've got a fair amount of foliage on there. I guess that's breaking up the shape of the tank. Again, I imagine that was more for anti-tank camouflage rather than anti-aircraft camouflage. And here, taking that even one step further, we get a couple of examples of tanks covered with chicken wire and then with foliage on them. I have to say that doesn't really break up the shape or the outline of the tank so much. It says here the Grant CDL, this was used for the Rhine crossing, and it's described as a mossy camouflage. It appears perfect but had little effective value as it did nothing to break the vehicle's outline. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what that is for. I guess if you're against that sort of background, you blend in very well, but then the running gear still stands out quite a lot. Perhaps someone just, I don't know, got a job lot of chicken wire and decided they needed to use it. And then we get our last colour plate for the British Forces. Again, everything khaki drab. We have a two-tone colour scheme on that Sherman there. February 1945. And then we're into the section on the German army. And we're straight into a colour plate. So some of this we've already seen in Panzer colours, of course. We get the 2- and 3-tone camouflage schemes. Dark yellow with the green and the red-brown on top in various patterns. And air superiority was an issue. A lot of camouflage, especially in Normandy, and particularly on something like this, the Flak Vierling, an actual anti-aircraft vehicle. And of course, at this stage of the war, we start to get those monster tanks, those monster AFVs. Here's a Jagdtiger. This is in Germany in April 1945, painted in overall Dunkelgelb, dark yellow, but you see how the dust and wear have produced a lot of variations on the colour. And again, I have to wonder at the work that goes into translating these black and white pics into colour, particularly back then. I mean, now it's something you can almost pretty much do on your home computer, but it must have been quite a challenge back in the day. And some more examples of those classic German 3-colour schemes, including my old favourite, the ambush scheme there, looking particularly nice on that half track. And once again, getting into the heavier stuff, the King Tiger. The Puma armour car, that was always a vehicle that fascinated me. I could believe it could drive forwards and backwards at pretty much the same speed. And then by the end of the war, of course, there were shortages of everything. So things are just coming out of the factory and going straight into the front line, I imagine. There's that Jagdtiger that we saw earlier with basic dark yellow, although it looks more like, well, it says here, a thin layer of olive green overall. So maybe it did get a quick paint job before it went into action. And of course, at this stage of the war, you start getting lots of pictures of knocked out German armour as well, or captured armour. We have a King Tiger here in that ambush scheme. Obviously that's been knocked out, and you can see there's something of the size of the 88mm shells that were fired by these things. And there's quite a famous photograph of that flak gun we saw the colour plate of earlier. I believe that's an SS unit, yep. 2nd SS Panzer Division, originally stationed near Toulouse, but ordered to the Caen area after the D-Day landings. So there we are, doesn't that bring us back full circle? Because as I mentioned at the start, I was recently in Caen for a few days. And we finish with a couple of shots of what some say was the best tank of the war, though of course, as with most of the German equipment produced in far too few numbers, the Panther. This is a Panther Ausf A, and again that's got Zimmerit, Dunkelgelb and olive green sprayed pattern. The National Cross, or the national markings, as you see in contrast with the Americans with a big white star, it's quite small and quite subtle, which again maybe points to the fact that at this stage of the war, the Germans were mostly hiding, working from ambush, and certainly had to keep their eyes on the skies at all times. And there we are, there's the back cover. Again, just a few more of those colour plates with that nice ambush scheme on the half track there. That's D-Day to Berlin then, another excellent reference book, one that I got a lot of use out of, not only from my modelling perspective, my 1/35th scale armour, but also for Second World War wargaming at 1/72nd or 25mm scale. I was really looking at the Normandy campaign, the Battle of the Bulge, that last year of the war. So it was very useful for that as well. I was also doing a lot of Eastern Front wargaming at the time, but we tended to use 1/300 for that. I guess we thought that the 1/300 suits that larger scale, if you like, of you know, Kursk. Not that we ever tried to replicate Kursk, but you know, they tend to be larger, more sweeping battles. So yeah, another great book, another valuable part of the collection. I've got a few more to work through yet. Who knows where we'll go next time? Perhaps we'll move away from AFEs and take a look at uniforms instead. Anyway, thanks again for watching. As always, if you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe. And please do keep those comments, questions and suggestions coming in. They're much appreciated. I'll see you soon.